This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien begins today's show with an outlook on the grain market. He discusses how the weather in the eastern Corn Belt has impacted the market. Continuing the show is K-State Extension wheat pathologist Kelsey Andersen Onofre with disease considerations during wheat harvest. She covers Fusarium head blight, common bunt, black point, sooty molds, and loose smut. Chip Redmond, K-State meteorologist, ends today's show with a weather update. He says part of Kansas received rain this past week, and with that rain, there is wind, lightning, and hail. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned into Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show as we normally do with a grain market update. And as always, we're joined by K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. Dan, thanks for joining us once again.
Thank you, Shelby.
Dan, last Friday we had two reports come out that contributed to the volatility in the grain markets. And so what does this mean for the futures?
Well, the grain stocks report came out and showed lower stocks than had been expected for a number of major commodities. So that in itself, if we only had that alone, that would have been a bullish factor. But then the acreage report that came out again on June the 30th had sharply more acres of corn planted than had been expected, sharply lower, way sharply, if that's the right university lingo to use, a lot lower acreage of soybeans. So the markets have been reacting in a big way to all that. The futures, of course, they responded. We ended up on yesterday's closes on July the 6th. We had September, which is now the effective lead contract for corn, closed at $4.99. It has certainly been higher in the past. When you look at that $4.99, we had been trading as up over $6 within the not too distant future, but had fallen to about $4.80 or so. So the $4.99, or essentially just under $5, is, for those that had seen that free fall, it's almost a relief, that it's not falling more. So that's where that stood at. For soybeans, August, the effective lead contract on the futures closed at $14.48.5, and for soybeans, that contract had traded as low as, basically just under $12, and had traded here in the last few days up to above $15. So again, more acres for corn and rainfall, and fewer acres for soybeans, even with rainfall, has brought us to the place where corn's been very weak price-wise, relatively speaking, stabilizing some. Soybeans very, very strong. So that fear is in the market. On the wheat side, wasn't a lot of major change that happened in that particular report. So you've seen wheat close yesterday at 8.43 3/4. If anything, there was some shortness in hard red spring wheat numbers, and the markets for wheat have generally found support. Again, the 8.43 3/4 closed yesterday, and we had within the last about 2 months, we traded as low as about 7.30 about a week or so ago, about 7.90 or so, just a little bit below that, and now we're at 8.45 or so. So again, 55 cents up from where we had been, and we're not chartists or chart watchers, technical traders here at Kansas State University. But if you look at where that price is at, you look at this big range we've been swinging back and forth in for wheat, and now we're basically just right in the middle of it, which means that we're trying to figure out what to do. So the futures have certainly been volatile. The volatility indices that we follow almost as high as we had gotten back right in the middle of the Ukraine-Russia start of those conflicts. So we're just quite volatile right now. And I think if we have time at the end to talk about where markets might go, it looks like a story that's probably going to continue until we have some surety for corn and for soybeans, and for what's happening internationally for wheat that would come into the market.
And another portion of the grain market that we often talk about is cash. And so what are we seeing there?
Just a lot of volatility and great changes. I know it for those of you that can, for folks that can look at our price sheets. Again, we follow the Colby area, Saline area, Topeka, Garden City, Hutchinson, Columbus, and you just see some things that look normal and some things that look abnormal. And you can certainly see with wheat harvest coming on that there are some locations, the Salina area, the Hutchinson area in particular, that have strong wheat prices, almost about basically $8.95, just under $9. And you've got other places that are much weaker, $1 or so lower. So and almost no forward bids beyond just the current cash, which is what you tend to have during a harvest time frame. So just a lot of variability around the wheat prices. And I would say for corn, it's interesting. The strongest bid over time normally for corn has been in southwest Kansas around the Garden City area, and that still is a pretty strong price. Here on yesterday's close, saw the highest price of about $5.99, just under $6. Great price. Yet you have bids at Salina, at Hutchinson, at Columbus that are all higher than that. So, the variable impacts of moisture conditions and growing conditions, local demand at these areas is really standing out. And I don't want to belittle the Garden City area. They have the highest forward price bid of $5.42, and the next highest one's $5.07. So still forward price is strong, but there's supply demand balances here right now in that area are less than that. And the same type of great volatility for grain sorghum. You got the two strongest bids in the Hutchinson and Columbus areas for grain sorghum, which is something to watch, I guess. And for soybeans, just an amazing variability also there. I guess the strongest bid that at least I could see around the state actually was in the Columbus area down the southeast corner. We have biodiesel plants being built in those areas, demand coming in and affecting all that. So $14.71 for a price there. The next highest price, Topeka area, $14.64, Hutchinson, $14.48, less elsewhere. So talk about all of that and look at the trends in different for these commodities, for the cash prices and their local basis. It really stands out. I just would say that when you look at corn basis levels, as we rolled from having the July contract as what we were basing local cash prices off of into the September contract, we really saw basis in some of these areas of the state really change, really jump around to the higher side, in particular in that Hutchinson area. So just a lot to watch right now.
And something we haven't really talked about recently as we do our grain market updates, but is important, local basis.
As we've talked about, I think local basis really stands out when you look at wheat, and you'd expect, gracious, we're in the middle of a harvest, and in a traditional time frame, you'd see a lot of weakness in wheat basis. But, as we look at these same locations, actually the only place that, whereas I just talking about how the Hutchinson corn basis really spiked higher, at least at one or two of the locations we were watching, the Hutchinson wheat basis really spiked lower. So, go figure, just a lot of variability. But in most other areas of the state, basis pretty much sideways, a little bit, I guess in the two western parts of Kansas, Colby area, Garden City, Wright area, that part sideways to lower or a little bit weaker, sideways to Topeka, Salina area, sideways to higher. Location we've been watching, Columbus area, sideways to a little bit lower. So no doubt, our farmer colleagues, our audience that we serve and are talking to, they watch these local basis situations. And so, say for wheat, they're taking wheat out of the field and wondering where to take it to. Well, they're looking at each of these local elevator bids, and the elevators are making their offers based on what space they have available, or do they have trains coming in that can take this out or not. A lot of times when you see a real spike higher in basis, somebody's filling a train or they're trying to fill up their storage. So I guess it's the time of real location to location volatility for wheat basis, particularly when some places have supplies and are filling up, and others are already filled up or just don't want to take anymore.
And something we've talked about a lot these past few times is the eastern and central part of the Corn Belt, those three I states, and what their weather has been like. And so how's that affecting markets now?
The rainfall that came about within the last week that affected Kansas also came and affected parts of, again, the three I states that are so important to U.S. Corn and soybean production, Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. So fair question. Well, when that rain came, has it changed the situation? When you look at the amount of soil moisture in those states still showing, even with the rains that just came, still showing pretty dry in through there. So, if you look at different drought monitoring tools that we have, and it looks like a major swath of moisture did come through along the Iowa, Missouri border on into central Illinois, on into southern Indiana, and down Kentucky and parts of Ohio. But other parts, again, northern Iowa, southern Minnesota, now parts of Canada and North Dakota. In fact, that's one of the things supporting the wheat markets, real dryness up there in the spring wheat areas. Anyway, point being that, so we've had swaths of moisture. We've had some wind damage come through it. I guess, Shelby, I think the moisture that's come has certainly been helpful. The markets have responded to it. When you look at the moisture maps, though, soil profile hasn't been changed in some of those areas that much. It sure looks like we're very likely to be affected by temperatures and rainfall or lack thereof still going on now through the rest of July and on into August, on into September, at least as long as until we start some of the in-the-field survey-based USDA numbers that'll come out in that September crop report. So a lot of volatility. I think if there's one thing I would tell people is that if the rains do continue to come, we do have downside risk in these markets. It's probably not to 350 unless there's something beyond just agriculture and that's a problem. But something, just as we've seen Dees corn fall pretty readily down to $5, does it go to $4.50? Does it go to $4.25? And soybeans, do they go to $12? Something along those lines. So we do have risk right now. In fact, we're living in it. And ag producers that are looking towards forward pricing moves, if they feel surety about what crops they have, to look at some type of a price protection move would be interesting. Of course, if they do that, they're the first one to say, yeah, I'll do that, but I better buy crop insurance too.
That was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you ahead. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue our Friday show now with a conversation about wheat harvest considerations as it relates to diseases. And in to talk about that, we have K-State Extension wheat pathologist Kelsey Andersen Onofre. Kelsey, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
The first disease you wanted to talk about today was Fusarium head blight. And as it comes to harvest, why do producers need to think about this? And are there certain producers in Kansas that really need to pay attention to it?
Yeah, so this is one that we really think about. We start to think about around that flowering time point because that's really when the crop is most susceptible. And this year, unfortunately, in the northwest corner of the state, we got these timely rainfalls in that late May time frame, and that just coincided with flowering. And we have been seeing a good amount of scab, according to some reports out of that part of the state in that northwest corner. So that's a part of the state that should really be thinking about harvest and thinking about scab at this point in the season.
And for those people who are going into harvest, are there things they think about if one field looks like they have it, but one field doesn't?
Yeah, so there's a few things that we think about when we're thinking about a field that had some bad Fusarium head blight. So we're obviously past the point where we can make a fungicide application, but we can make some decisions now at harvest. So, one of the things that comes along with scab is a toxin called deoxynivalenol, or sometimes we call it vomit toxin because it can cause vomiting and feed refusal in livestock and also can be harmful to humans. And that can be tested at elevators, right? So it depends on the year and how much is in the region, but there can be discounts if you do have high levels of DON. So that's something that you might want to consider if you do have fields that are separate or different varieties, and some had worse head scab than others, or Fusarium head blight than others, then you might want to consider harvesting them separately and keeping that grain separate. Now, I know that's not always practical, but that can help avoid contaminating some of that healthy grain if you do have grain that can be subject to a dockage.
For producers who are thinking about keeping possible Fusarium head blight seed from this year for next year, what do they need to keep in mind?
Yeah, so if you do want to save back one of those seeds, the most important thing to consider is a seed treatment. So seed treatment fungicides, they can really improve germination on those seed lots. You can send samples to the KCIA here in Manhattan and have the germination tested. But, in general, we want to make sure that we can preserve germination. And usually adding a fungicide seed treatment can do that. We have a good seed treatment fungicide publication for wheat here at K-State, available in the bookstore if you need some clues about the best products that you can use. But really, that's an important step. Now, one thing that, I often get asked about scab is it going to, if I have seed that's infected and I plant it, will that cause scab next year? And the answer to that is no, it's not systemic. It's not going to cause a head scab the next year. It's something that survives in the residue, and that's actually how you get infection in a subsequent season. But it can, again, just cause that reduced germination. So that's one thing we want to be careful about.
So just something for producers to keep in mind if their field's looking like they have it. Maybe try to separate them from healthy-looking fields, but it's not the end of the world, more than likely.
That's right. The other thing sometimes that's recommended is adjusting the combine fan speed. You do get those lightweight kernels, and if you do kick up that fan speed a little bit, you might be able to blow them out the back. But, there's some trade-offs there. You might increase your volunteer, so you have to be, mindful of managing your volunteer wheat and those types of things afterwards. So again, all of these things need to be balanced with your harvest priorities.
Kelsey, another disease to talk about is common bunt, which is also called stinking smut sometimes. And so, first off, why is it called that, and why do producers need to think about it?
Yeah, not the coolest name, right? But that's one that it actually produces metabolite called trimethylamine that actually smells like fish. So it has this rotten, fishy odor. When you can kind of smell it if you have the nose for it. You can smell it when you get into the field. And that's pretty distinctive of this disease, this stinking smut. So you can imagine if you get high levels of that, not only does it make, it produces these black spores. They're kind of like a powdered dust that replace the grain completely. So not only does that make the grain look, kind of dirty, and you have these spores on the outside of your healthy grain, but also you can get that odor, which, can be pretty unpleasant. So that's one that, if you do have seed that's been saved for multiple years, we can start to see that build up because you get those spores on the outside of healthy seed. You go and plant that back, they infect, you get infection into the next year. So it kind of builds up over time. The best way to control it, one is to buy certified seed. That's one way, right? Most certified seed is tested and screened to make sure it's free of bunt. And if there is bunt, they have to use a fungicide seed treatment. But the other way is just to have it well cleaned and use a fungicide seed treatment. That can really take care of a number of problems, but one of them is common bunt.
Is there something that producers then need to keep in mind during harvest for this disease?
Oh, that's usually when we notice that we have it. So, you could look into the grain tank and things look, black or smutty, or sometimes you see a big cloud. If it's really bad, you can kind of see a cloud following harvest. So, again, if it's really severe in one field and not in the other, you might consider a more thorough combine clean out after that field because, if you are saving that seed coming out into the next field, you could contaminate that healthy seed again. So, there might be some small things to consider there when you're planning which fields to harvest.
Another disease for us to talk about today is black point and sooty molds, and kind of has something to do with rain, which we have recently received in a lot of different parts in Kansas.
Yes, this one is one I get a picture of. Pretty often you harvest and then you have some grain where, half the grain looks blackened or kind of the bottom end of the grain looks blackened, or sometimes the whole grain can look blackened. And, that's typically black point, which is not a serious disease. It's really caused when we have these intermittent rains, these showers right before harvest, right before the grain's ready. So we get these fungi. They're not really good pathogens, but they can kind of hop on and cause some late season infection there and cause that blackening. It really does not affect yield, but it can affect germination in the next season. So it's one that if we do have black point, we do see that discoloration on part of our kernel, and we are saving that seed back for the next year, we probably want to consider a seed treatment. One that goes hand in hand are our sooty molds. So that's another secondary fungal infection that kind of looks like black spots on the outside of our wheat head. It's not a disease really, but it can be caused by just having that moisture right before harvest, and typically that wouldn't be a problem.
And if producers choose to use the seed treatment, is that really something that they're going to have to worry about next year, or is it usually pretty effective?
Yeah, that wouldn't be something you'd have to worry about being a problem in the next season.
Just if we had some more unfortunate events and they got it another year around.
Sure. That would be one that, so it would help with germination this year if you used a seed treatment. But, next year you'd have to be dealing with the same conditions again. Unfortunately, since that happens right at the end of the season, it's not like we can apply fungicides. They wouldn't work for black point control. So there's almost nothing we can do at that point. We just have to hope that the rains don't come at the wrong time to avoid this one.
And our last disease for us to talk about today, even though there are other diseases, is loose smut. And so why is this something that producers need to think about as they're in their fields for wheat harvest?
Yeah, so this is one that, it's really noticeable if you do see loose smut during the season. Usually when your wheat is starting to head, instead of seeing that nice green head, you'll see a big mass of black spores. And that is really characteristic of loose smut. Usually by harvest, most of those spores are gone. They've been blown away, and they've likely infected their neighbors, right? So if you did notice that you had loose smut during the season, again, that would be another lot that would be a really good candidate for a seed treatment if you're going to save it back. It shouldn't affect the yield of that grain. Of course, the heads that had loose smut, they won't yield anything, right, because it's all been replaced by those spores. But in the next season, you could have a lot of loose smut if you don't treat that seed that was in that same field. So, just something to think about if you had noticed that you had loose smut earlier in the season around heading. You'd want to, if you're saving that seed, consider that seed treatment.
For people who want to learn some more about these diseases or other things related to wheat, where could they do that?
Oh, there's a few places. So we talked about this recently in the Agronomy eUpdate article. All of what we just went through is summarized there. So you can look in the most recent issue or the June 29th issue of the Agronomy eUpdate. We also have lots of information available on the Bookstore about these diseases, managing Fusarium head blight, managing our bunts and smuts. And you can also just reach out to always your local K-State Extension agent or Extension office. That would be my first stop with any issues about wheat disease management.
Kelsey, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come on and join us and talk to us about a few wheat diseases that producers might want to keep in mind while they're harvesting.
Thanks for having me here.
That was Kansas State University Extension wheat pathologist Kelsey Andersen Onofre with information about wheat harvest considerations for diseases. If you'd like to find that Agronomy eUpdate where she wrote about these diseases, you can do so by going to eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. That will also be linked in today's show notes, as always, which you can find on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but when we come back on Agriculture Today, we'll be joined by Keith State meteorologist Chip Redmond with his weekly weather update. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and on our last segment on Fridays, as we usually do, we have a weather update. And then for that weather update, we have K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us once again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So first off, starting on a positive note, some of Kansas got some rain.
Yeah, really most of Kansas got some moisture. Now, beneficial moisture it was more isolated. A lot of folks have developed some pretty big deficits. We're averaging over an inch for most of central and eastern Kansas on a weekly basis. So after a dry kind of end of the June there, we saw widespread rainfall last Friday and then again several rounds through this week that brought some areas localized 3-4 inches of rain. There was some flooding in places, especially around the Wichita area. And then more meaningful moisture is likely to continue, and definitely a break in the pattern where we saw that extreme heat. And it is broke down. We're cooler now. We're getting some rounds of storms, and hopefully the warm season crops are flourishing, and everyone was able to get their wheat harvested before the rain arrived.
With that rain, we've seen some hail, some winds, and also some lightning.
Yeah, we've had kind of the whole gamut of winds been the most widespread, I'd say, with we had some winds measured 80 to 60 miles an hour in various places, with some damage obviously associated with that. But yeah, lightning's been the thing we've seen an increase with, and we even had a person hit by lightning here in Potawatomi County last week. And a great reminder that, when lightning is in the area up to 10 miles away, it can strike you. You hear thunder go indoors. Play it safe. Trees do not count as good cover. In fact, that increases your likelihood of getting hit by lightning. So get in a car or a sided walled structure and be safe during it, because no matter what you're checking out there in that lightning, it can wait 20 minutes for the storm passes.
Talking about the drought monitor, something we usually talk about on the show, did we see some improvement with that?
Yeah, a lot of the rainfall we saw this week fell after the drought monitor cutoff, which is Tuesday mornings. And so we had pretty widespread degradation in the east with addition of D0 and D1 drought in areas that didn't have any drought. And now all but the far western part of the state is considered in some sort of drought category again. So with that dry conditions and in heat the end of June, we definitely saw degradation. We did get some localized areas of improvement from Friday storms, but most of them were along the I-70 corridor and very isolated.
With the storms, we've also seen some cooler temperatures, and is that going to stick around?
Yeah, we had that brief warm back up on the 4th of July, very humid, and then we cooled things back off. Well, cool temperatures are going to stick with us as we kind of keep these rounds of storms moving through the region through Saturday and potentially even through Sunday as well. And that'll provide more cloud cover and keep our temperatures below average. Average temperatures are running in the near and above 90 degrees for high temperatures. So when we don't get into the 70s in places like we've seen in northwest Kansas over the last few days, that's really, really below normal temperatures. And we'll definitely get warmer than that. I don't think we'll stay below normal for long. Where when we start moving these, or decreasing our probability of precipitation as we get into early next week, our temperatures are going to rebound. And we push that big dome of warm air back down south, and it's going to gradually start to rebuild over the next few weeks. So above normal temperatures is favored really through the end of July.
And looking forward, what does that forecast just look like for people with the warmer temperatures?
Yeah, well, when we warm up that much, we usually dry out more. And I'm still watching to our southwest, where we just do not have any signs of a monsoon season in the southwest. The El Nino so far has really helped keep that southern jet stream amplified and has brought persistent stormy weather to that boundary between the cooler air to the north and the warmer air to the south. That's going to shift north again and likely stay that way into early August. And so that'll keep our precipitation chances probably at to slightly below normal, and will definitely keep us at or warmer than normal.
Chip, I appreciate you coming in and giving us our weather update. That included some good news this week.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was Kansas State University meteorologist Chip Redmond with a weather update. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Monday.